Thanks, Rama. Hi, Andita.
Hello. Hi, Ashna.
Yeah, are you able to hear us properly?
I can, yes. Can you
Yeah,
hear me okay?
yes, you're perfectly fine. Can you also show me your video once so that I can check if it's clear?
Sure. It's just that it's raining really hard here. So
Yeah,
sorry if there's a huge background noise.
no, you are looking perfectly fine. And I can't hear any noise, so it should be fine.
Okay,
So,
great.
yeah, we are expecting a delay of at least 10 minutes. So, what happened was people have gone for their lunch. So maybe you can
Okay.
just grab a cup of coffee and then join back. So
Yeah, no problem.
yeah, sure.
Sure. Ashna, sorry. Can you give me function to share my screen?
Sure,
Because
sure. I'll just do that. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
You
Ashna.
want, do you have a PPT to be shared or something?
I can share it on my own. I use Canva. So yeah,
Okay.
it's just a short one.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
less
sure.
than 10 slides.
Cool. So
Okay.
please go and grab a coffee and join back. By then
Okay.
I'll just get them all inside the hall.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you
Okay,
so much,
bye.
Ashna. See you.
Yeah, same thing. Hello, Professor Chendu.
Hello, good morning from here.
Yeah, it's almost afternoon here, but good morning to you.
Okay. So
Yeah. So we're just waiting for the participants to return. They've all gone to have lunch. So we're just trying to get them
okay.
inside the room. So do you have any PPTs to be shared or anything like that?
I think I do because you asked us to make one.
Yeah. So
Okay, so I can
do you want to just
I can
give it a try just to see if it's
okay,
going?
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let me give it a try.
Yeah, I've given you the co-host permission, so you should be able to share it now.
Can you see?
Yeah. Can you just
Just a
try full
moment.
screen once? Yeah, it's looking
Is it
good.
okay?
Yes, perfect.
Let's check the transitions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see the
Okay.
set.
Okay
Okay.
then.
Thank you.
So how long are we waiting for before they come back?
Just give me 5 minutes. I'll just try and get them on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And
Okay then.
sorry for the
Okay,
delay.
that's all right.
Yeah.
No problem.
Hi, Amin.
Are they online?
Yeah.
Hi, Chendu and Anta. Nitin here. Am I audible?
Greetings.
Thanks. So glad to see you. Hi, Andita.
Hello, Nitin.
Hi. Will you give us another 2 minutes? Kumar Sambhav is rushing to the floor. So we'll just take another 2 minutes before he joins us. So good to see you both. There he is. Hello. Hello. Chendu and Andita there. Could you put it on that gallery? Especially Andita is much.
Mail it to you for sharing presentation.
Yeah.
Hi, so Kumar joined us. Just give us 1 minute and we'll kickstart. We can start. All right. Have your permission. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Nitin from the Land Conflict Watch. I'd like to introduce my panelists who I'm trying to rein in today because they're 3 experts from a very wide angle and a very different approach. But all 3 of them are communicators. They come from different backgrounds, different streams of operations and work. But what the 3 of them do very well is to communicate to a larger audience of the issues they think of. Sometimes I think it's almost like having the knowledge of a classical musician, but trying to perform like a folk musician to speak to audiences that otherwise wouldn't come and listen. Each of them approach it differently, but I think they're trying to achieve the same goal of spreading the idea that contests, conflicts around resources and land are complex, and they all include lives of many people, and it's not a academic issue. It's very often an issue of that decides life, economy, and survival for many people across the world. Also lucky in this panel to have 3 people from 3 different parts of the world, and therefore 2 of our colleagues are going to be online. Also, you will hear different tones and tenors of English, so I'll request each of the panelists to go slow. The world who listen to us also, like we all claim we know English, but we all know very different English. So we'll try and go slow on that. I'll introduce the panelists to begin with. Chendu from Namibia, professor by profession, but a communicator, I'm told, writes very often and as assiduously and seriously in large-scale media as he does academic work. Anta, who is by profession a communicator, her job is to communicate the stories of a coalition of people working on land and organizations working on land, and communicate in formats that perhaps even academics and researchers find very difficult to grapple with. Represents in some sense, if you were to look at geography, Southeast Asia, but it's something that Uchendu reminded me when we were talking earlier, that simply because we are people of color in different parts of the world does not mean we're experts only in our parts of the world. We are experts who talk right about issues of land and tenure across the world. Perhaps we bring a different lens than the global north can on these issues. I wanted to introduce Sambhav Vilas simply because he's my colleague. He founded and now works at Land Conflict Watch, heads the research work as well as communication over there. What I'd suggest as a group for all three of you is that we begin by a 10-minute presentation or 10 to 15 minutes presentation by each of you, which kind of lays out what work you do, why you do it and how you do it, and a little bit of where you personally come from. I think it's because we're all from different worlds, it's useful for our audience to also know how you reach the point you did as a person. And can I request Amrita for you to start off? I hope you've shared your presentation sheet. Perfect. Amrita, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nitin. I hope I'm audible because it's raining really hard here where I am. And as you know, here in developing countries, internet connection and bad weather don't go hand in hand. So apologies apologies if there's instability with my connection. Sorry, Nathan, just to clarify, I'm just doing my introduction part, not the presentation, right?
Your presentation as well, please. We'll kick off with
Oh,
your
okay. Thank you. Okay, I will share my screen. I just prepare a very brief presentation. But maybe before that, I can introduce myself. My name is Andita Listiarini. I am based in Jakarta, Indonesia. I work for the International Land Coalition, which is a governmental organizations as well that work on securing land rights for the Asia Regional Coordination Unit. So in ILC, because we are such a diverse network, we are also a membership-driven network. So we have what we call members from all over the world. But myself, I'm responsible for communications for ILC Asia, or the Asia office, let's say, which is based here in Indonesia. But there are also other ILC regional offices in other regions, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Europe and the Middle East. So that's a little bit about me. As Nitin said, my journey before how I came to ILC. I've been with ILC for almost 4 years now, but I also have a background in media and journalism. That was my first job, actually, a long time ago. And I became interested in international development or civil society organizations before joining ILC, actually. It was all related to my experience as a journalist, as a reporter, meeting so many different people from so many different communities. I've covered stories about activism on various issues, and that's what made me interested in learning more about activism, let's say, or international development. But prior to working for ILC, I worked in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, also for a regional network-based organization called the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, which is just like ILC, but the difference being is that the members of APWLD, in short, are women's rights organizations from across the Asia region. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and the Freeman.
It's been raining apparently in Japan. Yeah, to
switch off the video.
Yeah, maybe.
Andita?
Should I?
Andita, if you could possibly switch off your video and maybe it would be more.
She has left.
No, no, she's
Ah.
still there. You're on mute, Andita.
Can we wait 2 minutes to see if we can get her back online? Be sad if she drops her, but let's try to get her back on.
Hello, sorry.
Hi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry. Again, it's I just changed my connection. I hope it's better now.
Sounds very familiar. We're all doing this constantly. So please go on. Yes.
Okay, 1 second. Okay,
Lovely. We can see this.
okay, great, great. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Oh. Okay, again, sorry for the connection issues. So I've prepared like a really brief presentation. Maybe firstly, I'd like to introduce ILC more. So again, I work for the Regional Coordination Unit here in Asia. In Asia, we have
Andita, you've gone on mute. You've muted yourself by mistake, I think.
yes, sorry.
Hmm.
So in Asia, we have 59 members in 14 countries across the region, which also includes India as well. In India, ILC has 15 member organizations. They are mostly people's organizations, really grassroots organizations, including indigenous organizations, pastoralist organizations, and most of ILC members in India are concentrated in Gujarat, although there are others who are present in other states. And so ILC, with the members, we work together to put people at the center of land governance. And at the national level, we have what we call a National Land Coalition platform, which is like a working group, basically, that includes members of ILC in one country. In the case of India, for example, all 15 members, and they call themselves the Land Forum India. Some of the members of Land Forum India, I think, are already familiar with the ILDC. They were also present in the conference, and yeah, the goal of the Land Forum India, for example, is to prioritize or put the interests of the people at the center of land-related policies. So that's
Andita, could I suggest if you switch off your video? I think there's a slight lag. Switching off the video might work for everyone. Is it possible for you to pause shut her video?
Let me try.
A little lag in your session on community.
ILC
See what's
and how we talk about land rights.
Yes. Yeah, Andita,
Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry again.
it's okay. There is a
Apologies.
bit,
Okay, I hope it's better now.
yeah, it's way better now. Again, you've muted yourself. Andita, are you still there?
Is she? And
She's still on mute. She's there.
She's still on mute. Oh,
Yeah, now she's unmuted, but again she's.
Hello.
hi.
Yes.
We've got you back. I think you keep your video switched off and keep
Yes,
yourself
yes.
muted.
Okay, I'm really sorry again.
Not at all.
Okay, I hope it's visible now. Also, my
It is.
screen.
It is.
Okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, well, continuing, we want to talk about why land rights still matter in the face of global challenges like the climate crisis and the pandemic, wars in some countries as well. At ILC, we really try to highlight the connection between land rights and intersecting issues. For example, in the connection between land and climate, how we communicate this is that we try to amplify the voices of those who are impacted the most by climate. For example, how local communities and indigenous peoples, we all know, and there are so many research or studies that have found how they are the guardians of our planet, but without secure land rights, they are prevented from protecting their land in a sustainable manner. So highlighting these kind of key messages, like how secure land rights for all are the key to progress on human rights, to achieving a sustainable planet, is something that we try to highlight at ILC. And we are fortunate because we have a diverse group of membership in Asia as well, who also work on these intersecting issues. I will just show you a quick example. This is what we did for the COP27 UN Climate Conference last month in November. We invite some of our members who work on the intersecting issue between land and climate. For example, here, Miss Esther is from AFA, and she went to COP as well, and she tried to highlight the important role of family farmers in protecting our planet while keeping their sustainable way of agriculture or farming. So we invite our members as what we call land rights champion, and we ask them to give some quotes, for example. And then how we communicate, I think what I'm showing here is just the surface, but I think these two elements are highly important when we're thinking about communicating land rights. I know that a lot of people in the audience and also the moderators, Nitin and Kumar, and my fellow panelists, Chendu as well, they are all communication professionals, and I'm sure they are very familiar with targeting the audience, amplifying their voices, the voices of those you want to highlight. So there are some questions that we need to think about before we communicate complex issue like land rights. Who do we want to reach out and how we want to reach them, how we tell a story with powerful emotions and evidence, and again, most importantly, how to use plain language to deliver a clear message. So another example of how we support land rights defenders, because again, at ILC Asia, There are so many countries. We're so diverse. People are working on so many different issues. This is another an example of how ILC Asia works with regional. This is a global media, actually, Mongabay. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. Back in July, there was a case, an arrest that happened on on a land rights, a woman land rights defender who happens to come from an indigenous community as well in Cambodia, Miss Heng Sapen, which from this photo is the one on the right, the one in black t-shirt. So she was arrested because one plantation company felt that she was encroaching on their land, when in fact she had been cultivating that land for so many years, because it had always been passed down from generations. So we worked with Mongabay and to do this investigative piece. This is a long form feature which you can find on their website as well. But the idea here is to highlight these kind of stories that don't really often come to light. We use social media as well. And this is some of the strategies that at ILC help us generate engagement, how we stay reactive, how to make compelling content, stay reactive. Maybe the best example is the case that I just mentioned with Ms. Sapen from Cambodia. As soon as we heard about her arrest, we connected with the media and also asked for the support of the member in Cambodia. So again, giving a spotlight of one's organization, their work, their experience. There's an example here, which I will share the link on the chat later on, of the story that we did on the Halia community. And in Nepal, Halia is the bonded labor in Nepal. And we worked with ILC members in Nepal and also with media people as well to make a short video. I will share the link on the chat box. And lastly, this is the most recent story about land conflicts in Indonesia. This is a video, and I will play it soon. So we were working with the Mangkit community, that's what they're called, in North Sulawesi, Indonesia. They had been entangled in a land conflict for decades with a coconut plantation company, but with people's organizing, advocacy, participatory mapping, evidence-based advocacy, that the Mangkit people who were represented by the Southeast, by a farmers union, let's say, they worked with one of ILC's members, KPA, and then they pushed for a land redistribution process to the government. In this case, it was managed by the Indonesian Ministry of Agrarian Reform and Spatial Planning. So I will try to play the video if that's okay. It's just under a minute.
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, it's not seeing, 1 second. It's not playing, I think. Maybe my connection. I will share this video in the chat box instead. I'm sorry, everyone.
Not at all. Send it across. We will at least circulate it when we circulate the video of the panel.
Yes.
Meeting.
Okay. And with that, thank you, Nitin. I close my presentation here, and I look forward to the discussion with everyone. Thank you. Sorry again for the delay.
Not at all. Andita, if I could push you a little and ask you a quick question on your presentation itself. You did say you work at these multiple formats. Are you able to use art, music, etc. as well to kind of elevate your pitch of the work you do, or does your organization stick to looking at text, social media, videos as the classical way of reaching out?
Music, not so much, but artists, yes, we have collaborated with artists before. I would say graphic designers are also artists. They make art. And last year, actually, ILC just finalized its newest strategy, the ILC strategy 2022-2030, and we collaborated with a collage artist for the design of the strategy. And it was really nice. We received so much positive feedback, not just from the members, but also people outside of ILC. So yeah, that's so far how we have used art, let's say, in our communication output. I can share with you as well this example.
Not under your Official Secrets Act. Please do share. We'd love to spread it around to others. Okay, let's move to our second panelist of the day, Chendu from Namibia, who as I was informed and educated, does not write only on issues of Namibia, but land across Africa, Europe, and other places as well. It looks like more principles of how land should be treated as well as specific cases. He's a pronounced writer in national media across countries, as far as I understand. Chendu, can I give you the floor and request you to both introduce yourself, perhaps a little better than I can, as well as your presentation on your work.
Thank you, Nitin, and thank you, Andita, for that very beautiful presentation. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Good. I cannot guarantee that my internet connection will be any better, but I'm really happy to be doing this. I think it's probably my very first or second time talking about issues related to communication. And that is because I am not the conventional, I'm not into journalism, basically. I'm an academic. I was born in Nigeria, and I did my primary to university studies in Nigeria, that's in West Africa. I also studied in the UK and studied in Germany, worked in Germany, and I'm currently working in Namibia. And through this whole process, I would say that communication has been part of me, in the sense that when I was a university student in Nigeria, I did write articles in journals, short articles, but mostly on housing, because I studied estate management. In the UK, I did more of poetry writing in the university newspapers. And then in Germany, I because of the language problem, I felt there was a gap in terms of information communication. And so I started what I call then a newsletter. I called it The Nigerian. And what I would do is read about Nigeria and then recycle it with maybe one or two editorials and share with Nigerian community. So why I'm saying this is because writing has been part of me, but there was never a very strong agenda around this. But then the more I studied land issues, the more I realized that I had to write more on land issues. So I think I didn't quite see any strong agenda other than personally, I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be heard. I wanted my opinion to be known. And when I now found myself in societies where there's a dominant view and I felt that it was not inclusive in terms of the voices, I tend to deal on issues related to issues of the marginalized group or the not so loud voices. And I think I'm lucky in this sense that land issues tend to be where these kind of things happen. So I'm a professor at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Prior to this time, I was a scientist at the Technical University of Munich. And in terms of the profession itself, I'm the co-chair of research and training at the Global Land2 Network, which is a network of 80 organizations from around the world, including the ILC, and that is hosted by the UN Habitat. I also happen to have a responsibility of being the coordinator of the Network of Excellence in Land Governance in Africa. That is a network set up by the UN, the African Union, and the African Development Bank to sensitize and promote land governance, capacity development in Africa. So I happen to coordinate the Southern African region. And so my institution, the Namibia University of Science and Technology, is the hub of land governance education within the Southern African region. I also happen to be a co-chair of a working group in the International Federation of Surveyors. So because that's where the Global Center for Land Discourse, tends to happen. I think with that, I believe that the reason I'm here is because I tend to write quite a lot of newspaper articles. So I don't have a coordinated communication path, but after you've asked me to make this presentation, I realized that I've actually been following a path. So I go to conferences like I am now speaking, and I write academic papers like everyone is expected to do, because then they say you either write or perish. So that I have to do because it's part of livelihood. And then you have to do community service. But I found an opportunity in my community service as an academic, as where I come into, I kind of encounter mainstream journalism, but from the sideline. So I'm not a journalist. Within the journalism circle, I'm an observer who steps out to go and write whenever I feel like I have a voice or I need to give a voice out there. So that said, you said I should give a presentation and I should be specific on a specific case. So I decided to present a work that I've done as an academic and which I've been following up in all streams and parts of communication. That work is called the Tenure Responsive Land Use Planning. And I would start by saying, because of that, being an academic, my work is, I have an agenda. That agenda has to remain the same all the time. I just seek for paths, through which I can, communicate. So my basic philosophy is land tenure security for all. And Andita shares that with me because we have that link with GLTN and within the global land community. Tenure security, land tenure is the relationship people have with land. How people use land also has influence on the condition of the land and the condition of the people. And how secure people are in using land itself also relates to livelihood issues. So the society is my laboratory. I'm a member of the society, and that's why when I'm with journalists and they try to make me one of them, I say, no, I'm a citizen journalist because I'm just a citizen who writes, but not a journalist who earns a living or who is actually trained to, do journalism. So my approach may not be conventional and may not be the right way to some people. And that approach is land method. So I look at societal problems, I try to find a solution that is related on dealing with land, and I write about it. My operational environment is academia, it's practice, it's activism, it's also as a citizen of the society. And the implication of this is that I'm one or two different things at the same time. And so sometimes as an academic, I speak as a professional because I do consultancies as well. And obviously when you do land method issues, it means you have to profile solutions to problems and you have to be someone who is actually within the profession. But I also find myself as a land champion, and that's where activism, comes in, where sometimes reasonably or unreasonably, I support land-related issues just because of the end for which I want to achieve. And then society matters to me, and that's because the goal is societal development. Whatever I write, whatever I say, the idea is that they should have an end that leads to societal development. So these are the philosophy and the ideology that frame my writing. And in terms of the styles change. When I'm writing academic work, I have to follow the scientific path, and other journalistic kind of writing, opinion pieces gives me the freedom to express myself in the way I would really love to express myself as a human being rather than as an academic. Because what I see in academia is that when we start writing, we already know what we want to do. We already know the message we want to pass on, and we have to write a 50-page article, knowing what we want to write, but then have to follow theories from the first page up to maybe the 45th page before we finally tell you what we want to do, because there's a sequence. But then when it comes to newspaper articles, I'm allowed to delve direct to the message. I'm allowed to use the language that I wouldn't want to, that I would like to really use, which scientists may not understand. And then that's where the issue of audience comes in. I write in newspapers because I want the policy issues I bring up in academia to be directed and communicated to people who can understand it in a different way. For instance, politicians don't know much about what we do in academia, and academics have a poor communication in linking with politicians, and that's most times because of our way of writing. So being framed on this, I'll give you examples. I've discovered that there's a path to my communication, and the path has been strongly around this. Now, in terms of tenure-responsive land use planning, I mentioned that land tenure is relationship people have with land. Land use planning involves the activities and decisions we make as to how we use land, who we use land, where the land would be, and to what use that land would be. And as you would know, I'm not a planner, by the way. Planners like to plan, and officially, when planners do their planning, the whole idea is always to control how you use land. And by control, land rights is an issue of freedom. It's not an issue of impediment. And planners tend to impede on the rights of people. So in 2016, after my PhD, I started this work, which fortunately happened to come from an institution that is a member of the Global Land 2 Network, and this came up and it was given to me. So I led the tenure-responsive land use planning approach, which is a land use planning that does not necessarily impede the rights of people, but rather allows that right, to flourish such that we are able to identify who owns what, for what, or why, and not just the ownership, but also the rights embedded in it. For example, in my village, it's possible that the land that my grandfather owns has a palm tree or a mango tree that actually belongs to my cousin's great-great-great-grandfather. And they've been using that for, let's say, they've been using that for 5 decades. And then if the government wants to come and acquire the land, normally what they would do based on normal planning is that they would give compensation to me, to my father or grandfather who owns the land, but who would not care about the person who owns the trees. And so the person who owns the trees has the right, even though he doesn't own the land, has the right to harvest. And if you've been using this for 50 years, for instance, and the government is acquiring, you're losing livelihood. And so the tenure-responsive land use approach means that every right on a piece of land is not only right, but also interest that exists on that land. The quantum of ownership and interest that exists on that land has to be enumerated in order to identify who owns what and compensate them accordingly. And the same applies when you're building. So I led the production of the policy guideline on tenure-responsive land use planning. Just let me, so that I don't block you. So when this document was published in 2016, it was published as a policy document, and it started with stakeholders like ILC. In fact, ILC was part of this, coming together and saying something needed to be done about this. And I just happened to have the opportunity of leading the writing. And then after this was published, I found out that it's something that is good for academia. I turned it into theory and wrote about it with some of my other colleagues in the Journal of Environmental Planning and Management. And then afterwards, it was becoming, stakeholders were beginning to embrace it. Just last year, we produced a practical guide on tenure responsive land use planning, showing the step-by-step on how one can do it. So this reflects my my train of thought in terms of how I take academic knowledge and put it into practical knowledge, and then hope. And now I say hope because I don't have the money to make to create societal impact, because you always need stakeholders to back it up. And then I hope that stakeholders can back it up. And I've been lucky to have stakeholders actually back this up. As I'm speaking to you at the moment, the tenure responsive land use planning policy guide that you see there, after we produce the practical guide, that practical guide is now being implemented in a place like Uganda by the Netherlands government and the UN Habitat in the Land for Scale project to secure land tenure for 30,000 smallholder farmers at the Mount Elgon region in Uganda. So for me, that is much more than an academic can do, but that's a group work, and that's what happens when you can communicate. But it does not end there, because the communication starts from, in this case, started from policy to academic theories, and then to practice. Now, another thing that now happens is that this particular document also, sometime this year, as you can see, 2022, because of its importance, the UN Habitat decided that they had to translate it to French in such a manner that other non-English speaking jurisdictions can also use it in securing tenure. So again, that's something that happens when you have stakeholders who have an interest in what you do. So I didn't do the translation, but obviously they found it necessary to extend the communication. And so what I had produced before was now extended to a different language without any input from me other than, is it okay with you? And I say yes. So, but this is where I think probably an area that is an area I enjoy. I enjoy it, and it's not typical academic because I have to write differently. So when I came to Namibia, and as some of you may know or may not know, Namibia is a country of about 2.5 million people living on a land of about 828,000 square kilometer. Namibians don't have land. This is probably the place where you have the most of landlessness because due to colonization, the Germans colonized Namibia, and afterwards the apartheid regime of South Africa colonized Namibia. So the colonialists gave most of the arable land or usable land to the European settlers. So as I'm speaking to you, the arable land in Namibia is probably entirely owned by about less than 6,000 Germans, while Namibians don't have much. So land is a hot topic in Namibia, which was why when I wanted to work here as a land, as a professor in land administration. So here I realized that writing academic work can't do enough. Something needed to be done, because when I walk out there, the country with the highest income gap, or if you like, gap in terms of living conditions, is South Africa, #1 in the world, followed by Namibia. And you can imagine where it's just 2.5 million people and they still do not have land. And so what I breed here is land rights. I realize activism has to be part of it, and also realize there has to be a different way of communicating. And so what did I do? I embraced citizenship education. That means that even what is happening currently, I have to listen and try to give an opinion. And what I've written in the past, maybe in a scientific form, I have to rewrite in a more policy-driven manner or common person's language in order to channel that. And so what you see here are some of the things that I've written in my 2 years of being here. In fact, not just 2 years. Within last year and now, November last year till today, I think I've written more than 32 articles in three major newspapers in Namibia. But there is this newspaper I love so much, the Namibian, because they love very controversial, provocative, and contentious issues. So they always accept my articles whenever I put it out there. I'll give you an instance. The document I showed you initially, which is the document on how to do land use planning, and when you read them, and in academia, you're always told that documentation is the key. Documentation is everything, and we all know that when you have land title, it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, when land title in quotes, because these days, some things we call title are not really titles, but just documenting the right to own land is not enough, because the disempowered, like women, the youth, and several others, can also have their piece of paper showing that they own the land or that the right is theirs, and yet they are not able to enjoy that right. And so you will see from the background, I wrote a paper, an article on land documentation. If it was orally preserved, it was documented. This case, I'm challenging the narrative, which is normally sold to us by our lecturers and professors growing up, that in Africa or Asia or some other places, that land was never documented, and because it wasn't documented, that's why it's not secure. And so the registration system that they brought from Europe, the torrent system and all that is the key. And here I'm challenging that actually oral preservation itself is documentation, because the Bible was never written, it was orally preserved and then written as fragments were found. The Quran was entirely orally preserved. The difference being that they found need to transfer these holy books at some point to transform to written documentation. And then I'm questioning why that was not the case with oral preservation of land. And therefore, the fact that land, something must be written down and documented, and we have to wait for the whole world to get, all land in the world to get documented before people can feel insecure, does not make sense. I'll give you another example. In Africa, for instance, only 30% of the land are titled, which is surveyed and titled, where you can actually go and say, this is the person that owns that, and you find it on a register. Globally, I think it's almost the same, about 30% in the global south. And the UN Habitat says that for us to document all land in the global south, we need about 600 years to do that. In fact, the FAO, some others have even talked about 1,000 years. Now, the question is, do we have to wait for 1,000 years for people to actually be documented that something that is theirs is theirs? And so I challenge such narratives. And here you will, the other side, you will see, I say men's issues aside, there are ways women contribute to their land poverty. Also, in my conventional documents, it's fine. We know that women are marginalized and that patriarchal societies exist, and in fact is the evil holding us back in terms of gender inequality. But also I come in here and I challenge the narrative and I say, but if you take women aside, if we kill all men in the world, does that mean all women would have equal land rights? I don't think so. That means there is something in addition to just patriarchy. And so here I'm calling on women to also think that there are things they do probably that also lead to land poverty of other women. For instance, of course, I'm blocking the articles. For instance, there's something that is called brother complex. A woman would normally support the brother, even when the brother is wrong and is taking away land from another sister and all that. So you have brother complex, you have uncle complex, you have father complex, and there's my most explosive article, actually, is the one that you see banning land ownership in Namibia. If it's anti-foreigners, it's anti-African. Now, this particular one, it caused havoc over here because there's a party, a political party itself that has put in a bill in the Namibian parliament to ban all foreigners for having land. So no foreigner should own land in Namibia, and only Namibians should own land. And it's gone through parliamentary hearing and all that. And this particular party calls itself a Pan-African party. Of course, you can understand why this party has to come with this, because when most people from Europe, hello?
Hi, Chendu, I have the horrible task of telling on a panel on communication to maybe communicate less.
Okay. Okay, so but I'm going to finish soon.
Because I want to open this up to conversation, which is better communication than each of us just talking about ourselves. So I'll give you a minute. I'm so sorry for being such a horrible person.
Okay. Okay, no problem. It's fine. And so this particular issue, I raised it up, and I got a backlash from people from that party. But at the end of the day, it led to a kind of a form of communication. So the pathways of influence of my communication has been, for instance, the tenure responsive land use planning that I've been communicating through different means is now being written by other scientists as a topic on its own in both academic and in terms of policy. And on that ground, the last part of it is that the work itself is now being implemented in Uganda, as you can see on GLTN website announced. And currently we are working with a municipality called Okahandja in Namibia on implementing this approach. And so my communication has been more about policy to theory and to practice, and then trying to see that it does have societal impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm so sorry for cutting you short, and I'm probably the worst place to kind of hold.
No, it's okay.
This first 10 years of my writing on environment and land issues, I used to work for one of the largest papers in India, probably one of the largest papers in the world, just because we have the numbers. And after 10 years of writing, somebody wrote back in the first ever response from a reader. And I was so elated saying I've got a response from the reader finally. And the fellow, after 10 years of what I thought was very serious writing, said, "Lovely writing, can you help me sell my furniture?" It was very disappointing. So probably the worst person on the panel to do this. But I have the privilege of also introducing my friend and colleague and partner in several crimes, Sambhav. Sambhav.
Thanks, Nitin. Good afternoon, everyone. It was really lovely listening to you, Chendu and Andita earlier. And I'll admit I am just a journalist, and I gotten into the space of land governance, etc., through journalism. So while many of you here in the audience, Chendu, others, you've experts on the subject, I mostly will communicate or limit my communication to how to communicate land issues that I've done so far. Briefly, Nitin did introduce. In fact, he has been my guru for learning all this, and he still guides us at Land Conflict Watch at many places in terms of communication. So please add, Nitin, if there is anything on the subject. I reported on environment for about dedicatedly on environment for 6 years, and then as a journalist, I moved on to report on other things as well. But land and environment remains very close to my heart in terms of journalism and reporting. So the major, for the past 5-6 years after reporting on several issues, thrust of our work, or the anchor that holds many of us together, is something called Land Conflict Watch. And many of you are already aware. I think Pranav has been part of the journey. Shailesh here in the audience, who's very beginning, is working with us, helping us with setting this up in the beginning. The idea for us about communicating land was that we've been found in India that there is a very aggressive agenda of country as a developing economy to use land as a resource for development. Right? It's an economic resource for all kind of infrastructure, industrial development, and at the same time, we have huge population dependent on land, which does not treat land as an economic asset, but also has a lot of cultural, social values attached to land. These competing demands cause a lot of conflicts, and we have been in the past reporting on these conflicts generally when they flare up. So say something has come up in the Supreme Court, say a Niamgiri case of mining and Dongriakon tribals not giving up land, or a POSCO, or say a Mahan, or some violence happening, police atrocities around land or land to takeover. So when these individual instances would happen in different parts of the country, there would be some media reporting when they really flare up, right? But land issues and land conflicts are not about only these big cases that would come up at the national front. There are several hundreds of cases, hundreds of conflicts going on across the country, and they all have similar reasons. At least the underlying themes and systematic issues around why land conflicts happen are almost similar. It's the issue of governance. It's the issue of equitable transaction of land and natural resources. So slightly, as I think Nitin also mentioned, that would probably bring some of our personal journey. So what triggered this project, and then I'll come to what this really is. As I was saying, that when you see in media reports, you see one case reported, or a lot of times even not reported, right? So I was working with one of the largest newspapers, and we did report on several environmental stories. And once in a while, there would be questions from editors or things like, you are reporting something happening in a corner of Odisha or something happening in a forest of Chhattisgarh. How does it matter to population in Delhi? How does it matter to our readers of this newspaper's readers in Delhi? And why are you reporting again and again? These things keep happening, right? Conflicts are not one-time events. They would be processes that would keep evolving, and there would always be something going on. So in response to that, I thought that there is a need to sort of show the scale of the problem, show the impact of processes like land conflicts, and then keep, like, how do you communicate them as a central theme which influences political economy of the country. So to be able to do that, we thought that it might be a good idea to develop a database to begin with and understand how many such conflicts are going on in the country. What are the underlying themes that influences these conflicts, that aggravate these conflicts, or even things that may lead to resolution of conflicts? What are the things that help people on the ground or government agencies to address these conflicts? And in generally, how do they play out? What are the effects on people, their lives, their livelihood? So to do that, we started building a database of all ongoing land conflicts across the country. And as a result, this Land Conflict Watch website and the database came about. So if you see this right now, we have about 700 cases in the database, which affect over 6.8 million people. And in this database, we developed a network. To build this database, we developed a network of researchers who are spread across the country. They collect data on specific data points about how many people are affected, how much land is affected, if there are investments involved, who are the investors, how much investment is involved, which are the legislations, legal loopholes involved, what are the demands of the communities, why really the conflict is happening, as well as the stories of people and actors involved in it. Who are these people? Why are they in conflict, right? What is the use of land that these people depend on? So all these data points we collect, and for each case study, each of the case study is a story, right? So we then, once this data comes in, there are people who sort of refine, review this data, and then we communicate these stories on media, on social media, each one of them. But as I said in the beginning, there was a need of also telling larger stories about broader trends and how policies or social practices or economic practices that currently are on, they influence the land conflicts or land governance. So then we started looking at trends through this database. And then we have, say, is there a particular scheme which is causing land conflicts across the country? Is there a particular law or a notification of the government or a way through which industry takes over land is problematic, which causes conflicts? So those kind of trends, and then we work with journalists, the experts who, our team of researchers who work with this data, then collaborates with journalists to write these thematic articles in media. So that's how broadly we look at, and then as I keep saying that the beautiful thing about data and database is that you never know in the beginning what might come out from it. Once it becomes aggregate, once you collate, then there are several themes that keep emerging. So we keep on adding more and more data. We keep on thinking of doing more and more stories and analysis from this data. Could you move to the next slide, please? So I thought I'll give you. So this is how the database looks like, and each one of this case study is a story. So you can click on any of these conflicts, and then you can find. Just go back to it. You can find very micro granular data about each case, and you can find documents attached for each case studies, and all the information is based on documents. So much of it is secondary research, but attributed to documents, government documents, independent research, and some of it is also collected by talking to people involved in these cases. Can you go to the next one? So just one example of how, say, stories come out from this and how do we work with journalists. There is just a little bit of background of forest right. I think many of us know, maybe our friends outside India. So we have a law for recognizing the rights of tribals and indigenous people who have traditionally been living on land, but they did not have formal titles over that forest land. So we have a law called Forest Right Act. And as I said in the beginning, forests are also very precious and lucrative resource for other players. So there is industry, there are governments who always want forest land, and India is land scarce country. So you need to go somewhere to take land to develop infrastructure industry. So the law says that whenever the forest land is taken over by any project developer or for any non-forest activity, you have to take permission or consent from the indigenous people or tribals living in those regions, right? Now that's the requirement of the law. Only once that permission or consent is taken, the government will give approval to those projects for taking over land. That's the land of the law. Now we had several cases coming up in our databases reported from the ground, which said that a project is coming up, it's approved, but people are protesting. Now that's contradictory to what law says. If people are protesting, means they haven't given consent, but the project has been given permission, which means in the government records they would have shown that the consent has taken. That's how the permission would be given. So we started looking at these cases where these cases were coming up and started looking at where in the government records actually the permission or the consent of people has been mentioned or taken. So we had some 35 cases, and we found that in many of these cases, these consent letters were fudged. They were like some other village people who signed these Gram Sabha resolutions saying we have given consent, etc. While when we were reporting these cases from the ground, they would say we never give consent. The Gram Sabha were fake. The letters are fudged, and they have in fact written formal letters to people from the ground complaining about these Gram Sabhas or consent being done. So we put them, we juxtaposed these documents from the ground and that was coming in our database to the documents which are available in the government records of giving consent, and realized that how, and we put them together to show how these this law is being violated, and where exactly this process is being violated. Is it at the district magistrate level? Is it at the higher level? So those documents are actually available in public domain. It's just the database helped us put them together, and we had a story about this. Then it even went to the parliament. In parliament, there was a ministry inquiry about why these things are happening. So the idea for us, as I said, once you have this data and once you have these documents, it was for us, it was important to say things that we generally keep hearing from the field or voices from people, to also sort of back them with data and documents so that the stories are powerful, and then there is some impact around it. So yeah, largely I think that's what we do. And now we have been looking at not just land and not just conflicts around land, but generally how land management, land governance issues take place, how even best practices of when players apply or actors in these conflicts apply best practices, how the conflicts get resolved. There are instances of those, and those are the stories we are reporting. So as we continue to track these transactions and tell stories around that. I'll stop there. There is any
I'm
question?
so glad, because it's going to be more horrible to you than I was to Uchendu, because I have a right over you. Thank you so much. I keep thinking I partly come from a culture where we didn't have written histories for very long. And there never used to be this difference between saying who tells the story. The storytellers were not a specific person in a society or a community. Everyone was a storyteller. Everyone, almost to different degrees, had an ability to tell a story differently. Partly written word, and I think partly people like us who pretend we are experts have created such complexities about how much we can say. Are we such important people that we can only use very heavy jargon to convey ourselves, because it's impossible to otherwise convey the complexity of our worlds? And frankly, if I think back and if we look at literature, perhaps the most complex thing to ever talk about is love. These issues of land, etc., are relatively very simple, yet we tend to kind of get screwed up around it. I keep thinking, all the love stories, all the complex relationships between human beings, that's the most difficult onion to peel layers off. How do you three guys, you three people in some sense, think of jargon? And are you three conscious that when you write or you get people to write in public domain, how do you peel off the jargon? Is it a conscious effort? Does it come easily to you? I'm sure Andita, particularly because she's a foremost communicator, maybe for her it's a default. Her job is to peel off jargon and then put it in public domain. And it's become even more important with social media. I wanted to start off with perhaps Uchendu, for whom it might, I'm presuming, the most complex job to take the jargon of your academic world and write for public. I'll give each of you 3 minutes. Sorry, I'm still going to use the whip and try and control the conversation. Uchendu, 3 minutes to help me understand and help our audience understand, how do you deal with jargon? How conscious are you when you write? Need to remove phrases like land, tenure, etc., etc.
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
So yeah, so thanks very much for that. Yeah, so there's the issue of jargons. Yes, I try to use them, definitely, but that's where the writing becomes difficult, because in my experience, the newspapers I write for would always ask for 900 words of article. And that's where the problem starts. And so many a times I actually write maybe 3,000 words of article. And then I begin to read and reread and trim them down, remove, and then I ask someone to read. I mean, at the earlier stage, I asked someone to read, but even up to now, there is always one person between me and the editor of the newspaper who will read it and say, look, I don't understand this. I don't understand that. I don't understand that. And then I'll begin to redefine. So sometimes I have to go back to the dictionary. Dictionaries have a very smart and quick way of explaining something. So I go to the dictionary and use that approach to actually redirect and redefine my words. And then where I must use those terminologies, I use them, but in brackets, I find a very quick description of the word. And so, yeah, and I think I do get a lot of feedback from people coming to say, how were you able to make it this simple? But I can tell you, yes, that's the problem. Communicating it is always the issue. So I always have to go back to my dictionary, even though I know the meaning of the word, but now I'm looking for the expression on how it's going to be easy for me. So I go back to the dictionary where it's tough for me. I ask someone to read. That I always do all the time. Or I ask someone, in one sentence, how would you describe land tenure? You know, that's and so sometimes I tap into the, you know, to the brain of people around me. For instance, I have a research group here, and so it's about 10 of us. So many a times I have this sort of discussions with them. How would you describe that? How would you describe that? And so I buy into that, because at the end of the day, these people are the same people who will read my article when it's written, you know, so I kind of tap right from, you know, their own brain directly. And yeah, unfortunately, most times I can't give them credit.
Yeah, thank you. Amrita, I wanted to add a layer to the question to you. You also, because you live in a geography and you work for a community which is far wider, how do you deal with multiple languages and then communicate out of that without using the jargon, but hopefully keeping the essence of those languages and cultures in your work?
Thanks, Nathan. I'll try to answer the last question first. The multiple locations for geography areas that ILC Asia works in. I mean, basically, maybe you can already tell that ILC's working language is English, but of course, in Asia there is no one single language that that we all speak, right? I mean, we also don't expect people from many Asian countries to speak English fluently as well. So it's not like countries in Latin America, for example, where they have Spanish as one common ground. Even in one country like India, you have hundreds of languages yourself, and you don't expect people to speak English all the time. But we are fortunate that again, because ILC is a network and we have um, story one issue country, we always from them. And when people from one community, for example, maybe in Bangladesh, we always try to have the member by our side, and they can also connect us with this is a very journalistic term, a local fixer, where this person can help us communicate again the our needs, and also like the jargons, you know, translating from one language to English. But I'm a native Indonesian. I speak Indonesian is my mother tongue. I always also try to avoid using complex words, big words in my own language in Indonesians. And I agree with Uchendu that sharing your work with other people, asking for their opinion, having like a second pair of eyes is usually really, really helpful. But I've also had the experience of working with the media, with journalists as ILC, and asking for their opinion as well, because journalists also know how to communicate in a simple way. They know how to be clear, concise, and plain, but also staying engaging. I still have faith in a lot of media outlets. I know there are so also many media outlets who don't really embody these values, but I know there are perfect ones. I mean, not perfect, but really good ones, excellent ones. And also at ILC, we always try to communicate our core values. Like, for example, if we want to tell a story about how a land rights defender in Cambodia was arrested because she was just protecting her land, we try to avoid starting our argument, because at the end of the day, we want to argue that that this is wrong, that this person should be protected for their land rights instead. But we want to avoid starting the argument by I don't know, maybe presenting the complexity of the land law in Cambodia and how such and such should not be arrested because in one article it doesn't say that this person can be criminalized, blah blah blah. But we want to try to appeal, to a common value. So we start by telling the emotional story of this person instead, before zooming out and really presenting how the legal framework of land rights in said countries, for example, and so on. So yeah, I hope that answers Nitin.
It does. Samba, I'm going to turn the question completely around to you. It's ideally a question we should have asked over a drink or a cup of tea, but mostly when we're together, we end up working on the daily grind. Something I thought, because you and I both started as journalists, and we over time developed some understanding of a subject, and it became very important, say for you, I know for me also personally, to try and position ourselves as experts of the area. You started an institution which has supposedly an expertise. I always feel the pressure that as a journalist who's known as a dumb character, and truly most journalists in India are, to try and then pretend at times that you are an expert. The tendency, or at least the temptation, is use a little heavy jargon. It'll make others feel, yes, he or she does know the subject. Do you face this dilemma personally, that you want to be acknowledged as an expert, but the job is actually to write something?
Yeah. No, that's a brilliant question. I don't know if I'm equipped to answer it well, but yeah, there is a constant dilemma for sure, and it's a big one. For two reasons. One, as journalists, and I think it boils down to the function of, or the purpose of, communication and journalists. So there are, I would say, as a reporter or journalist, I feel there are two basic objectives I feel in that I am writing for. One is to cause impact, to have things changed, and that can only happen when you can influence people who have the power or influence to change things. So policymakers, academicians, bureaucrats, politicians, government. And the other thing is to communicate it to citizens. And there is always a sort of a conflict between how do you achieve both the ends. To communicate to citizens, to have more and more people by your side for your story and the cause that you're talking about, you need to communicate to them in as simple way as you can and as interesting and entertaining way as you can. While on the other hand, as Nitin said, there is always a pressure of a policymaker or a politician or parliament listening to it when they think, oh, this is very serious. This is like very evidence-based, jargon-filled, because that's the language they understand. Government, that's not the language governments and bureaucrats tend to take. So there is always a conflict. And I think we try to find a balance when we are doing the stories to be able to address to both kind of audience. And as I say, that there are a lot of times, maybe say the complexities of how government functions, complexities of how these transactions happen at the large scale, how land governance happens. If we could also, I mean, I personally try, and even I know, Nitin, I've also learned a lot from your work and others who have done this, that you try and turn around the whole process or complexities into a story itself, so that your audience or citizens are also not sort of put off by it. You can tell, okay, then the file goes from this office to this office, and suddenly in between the file didn't move. So there is a story in it, or this was supposed to be done. This is how the letter should have moved, but somebody in between that letter did not move. So there is a story in it. So the audience is also engaged while you're also talking about the processes and larger process, which otherwise when the input of the story is coming to you might sound very complicated, because somebody is telling you, oh, in the RTI file, this is how it happened. And then you have to think, how do you communicate to a 10th standard student that they also find it interesting, or an 8th standard student that they find it interesting. So I think Uchendu was also saying that he asked someone that you explain this thing in a line. What generally practice that we apply is that we try and say the story in 2 lines to a school student and say, this is really the whole 3,000 word article that I'm writing. Can I tell that in 2 sentences to person and still engage them with interest. So yeah, I think that's a constant sort of struggle that we go through, and if you do that enough, if you struggle enough, I think you always find a way to communicate with both the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember there were times when, we'd written over some subjects for a few years. So sometimes I usually believe journalists were invited to panelists as light entertainment, middle of very dense stuff, because they'll have a few anecdotes to tell and the audience will feel a little lighter. And I used to need to wear formal clothes where I look like I'm a serious person till I grew a gray beard. And then I realized now's the time to try and look lighter. You have to put a lot of effort. So I think a lot of this is also performative in a way, like how you write, where you position yourself, you even choose what newspapers to write in. Do I not want to make a meme? Do I not want to make a song on my story rather than sound like I'm writing a 800-word, really intellectually charged piece? Whereas internally, I know a song might actually go far further than my 800 words ever will. But I am also contradicted by the fact that I want to sound like I'm an expert. To myself, I want to claim after 10 years of work, I'm an expert. I'm not a singer of a song. And I think there, to me, at least, personally, lies our dilemmas of people who understand in the modern formal world of rational thinking or supposed rational thinking, understanding of a subject, and them being able to be storytellers. At least I know of our forefathers, our mothers before us, they were all brilliant storytellers and they were all subject experts. They knew all the medicinal plants to be brought out of a forest, and they would have 10 songs around them as well. And they would sing them pretty easily without feeling that them singing songs makes them less of a shaman or less of an expert. That's disappeared over time. Perhaps we'll find simplicity to our communication and to our own lives over time. I think if I have Ashna's permission, can we keep it alive for another 5 minutes? And because we've not let, again, ironies of our session, considering we're about communication, we've not let anyone else ask us questions. So if there are any, happy to receive one last round of them. Would you want to also introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Is there a mic for her?
No, it's fine.
Is she audible?
Yeah, we over for them.
Is there a point where she can come closer and no, because for the panelists to hear you.
You can come.
Sorry, Pratap. Thank you.
Okay, my question is with both of you. Coming from a journalism background, so covered worked with some newspapers. So when we read about land issues and all, we mostly covers cases and we see urban areas and we forget about rural areas. In 70% of the cases, mostly and issues happen in rural areas. So as I've also followed your website and also read about it. So just want to ask how to make change with regarding the reporting, or what do you suggest for the future journalism students or policymakers working in land issues, and basically now land acquisition and so.
Because my question is somewhat related.
Certainly.
So if you can also plug it.
Of course,
might be.
but you'll have to get closer as well to the mic so that other panelists can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my question was also related to land conflicts themselves, and I actually wanted to, and something I've always been fascinated about is the use of the word conflict itself. So I also wanted to know how or when does a disagreement or when does an issue become a conflict, and what actually went behind using that word, and what is that the picture that we're also trying to paint when we use it. So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the first question is particularly for Sambhav to answer, but to Chendu and Andita to kind of give you a context, I think, to the question. Indian journalism is going through a horrible phase. It was never very good,
Yeah.
but it's terrible right now. And it's also particularly the English media in India caters to a very minute English-speaking audience, which has great political import, but very little value in society per se. And I think part of the question she's raising is because it's written in English, issues of urban India get reflected more than rural India. And Sambhav's work and LCW's work, in contrary to that, focuses on rural India. So Sambhav, if you want to respond to that, then I'll open the second question to all three panelists.
Yeah. So no, I think that's a very valid question, and I know a lot of reporters and not a lot of journalists would want to go, given an opportunity, to the rural areas and report, which should ideally be the case. But as Nitin said, I mean, this is not the problem as much of how journalists treat land conflict and how they want to report, but actually how our media is governed and how our media functions or their own. So nobody wants to put resources in, say, going out, travel, and field reporting. No media house right now want to spend on that. So that's more of a function of the business itself. You want to sit in the newsroom, go to the city where you live in, get usual stories and report, right? So that's low cost model. Second, I think that's largely the model. And because you don't want to spend money, then arguments and reasons are given. Oh, our readers are not interested. Our readers in the cities, etc., are not interested because you don't want to spend money or resources in doing that. Readers and audience definitely are interested in the issues happening around. So that argument doesn't work. But yeah, that's what it's used. So I think 2-3 ways of doing this. That's exactly one reason how land conflict watch also came about, because the similar reason was given. Why are you talking about conflicts? Why do you want to go through the field? Why do you want to report? So then maybe so we try to sort of report those issues still sitting, say, in Delhi, but also talking about these conflicts by collecting information through secondary sources or talking to people who are on the ground, collecting as much documents about these issues. So there's one way to do that. I mean, you do enough of reporting remotely and still find stories which are compelling and, which compel even your newspapers and editors to publish those stories. So it's more challenging because you're not talking to people, you're trying to find information from here. Maybe resources like, I hope that Land Conflict Watch database itself is a resource which helps journalists to do that. We have documents and data there for people to report. And second, I think if you can convince people to fund your travel and report, that's the second, usual way to do that. But yeah, these stories are important to be reported.
I have one.
We'll have to pause because I want to take a response to her question, then we can come back to you. I want to slightly interpret a question because I also see it in multiple languages. There's some languages which are attuned to using synonyms very quickly. There are others which don't allow it. So as her question said, what's a dispute? What's a conflict? What's a difference of opinion? Is it when somebody slaps each other? Is it when somebody abuses each other? Is it somebody filing a suit in a court against each other? How do you, in your communities, in your communication, and in your different geographies, say what is a conflict? I want to start with the Chendu first and give each of you a minute. Chendu, you're on mute. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I think on the issue of conflict, obviously, apart from in today's world, where some people talk about being in conflict with themselves, but in reality, the kind of conflict, is the work generation. People are in conflict with themselves. But other than those kind of people, usually when we talk about land rights, you can be in conflict except there are two parties or more. So first of all, there has to be two parties or more for there to be a conflict. And in the context of land right, there has to be an overlapping rights for there to be conflict in the first place. So that means, by that, it means that one person's responsibility or obligation or right overlaps with that of another. And this can manifest in the terms of use, or it can manifest completely in terms of physical occupation or, physical occupation. So now, when do we know there are conflicts? Obviously, I think the issue of conflicts becomes difficult because conflict can appear in maybe 2 to 3 different ways. So you can have, a latent conflict. So, there is something there, there's a dispute. And I'll come to whether we use dispute or conflict, but for now, let's use conflict. There is an overlap in terms of interest on land. But this is there, you know it, you feel it, but it has no consequences at the moment. So that could be a hidden conflict, latent conflict. Then you have open conflict. Usually when we talk about land conflict, at that point is already open such that the next person can see it. And that's where the reporting, tends to happen, because there is now an evidence which you can use to prove that the conflict is there. So maybe one or two people are over each other and then there is the issue of violence. So when the conflict goes into violence, as Russia is bombarding and Ukraine is bombarding Russia in Ukraine at the moment, is an open conflict. We all know what is happening. There's complete destruction, but the conflict has been there for a long time. And we know that it has history. And this conflict we know is natural resource related. It's something about land. So what we normally call conflict when it has emerged is open conflict. But other than that, there is the hidden conflict, which is where we can identify where interests, land rights, land interests, land obligations, or ownership has overlapped. And this can only happen between two people or more. Thank you.
Thanks, Chendu. Andita, you want to give it a shot? What's the difference between a conflict and a dispute?
I think Uchendu,
I should be taking that.
I think he has elaborated it really, really well. But
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Uchendu. You can go and then I'll go.
Okay, no, I don't want to put Andita in that sort of situation. Actually, I just mentioned dispute. The reason is, in academia, in academia we like to separate everything. So in academia, the Millennium Challenge, which is US8, likes to define a dispute as any sort of disagreement on land that is within a certain square kilometer, right? And then a conflict is when it's wider. So to me, that's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. The FAO has its own dimension of what is a dispute and all that. So those things are there, or people trying to differentiate them, but the basic factor and the basic character or feature of a conflict is that there's a disagreement, and the disagreement, at least in land conflict, there's a disagreement, and that disagreement is over land, which does not have to be physical land. It can be physical land occupation. It can be just an interest in the land. It can be some other thing, and it has to be between two or more parties. So yeah, Andita, I don't know what you call dispute, but I think they are conflict.
Andita.
Thank you, Uchendu. I think in terms of definition, Uchendu is the real dictionary here, so I'm not going to go on that road. But maybe I'll try to share how at ILC we also support these kind of cases and how we communicate these kind of issues as well. At ILC, we always try to use a positive tone in our messaging. In our language, but of course there are times when we have to be critical, especially when our member organizations who are working with the local communities on the ground directly share with us how such conflicts and disputes happen, unfortunately, on a regular basis. So this is where when we tell these kind of stories, we also try to be critical to, let's say, the government or the authorities in this case, who unfortunately enacted any kinds of violence, harassment, threats, etc., to land rights defenders there. But it's unavoidable, unfortunately, to not use the word dispute or conflict, because that's essentially what happens on the ground. But we try, whenever there are emergency situations like this, we always try to verify it first, because received like requests or let's say requests where communities are asking for assistance, and that's normal. I mean, sadly, it's normal, but before we decide to do something, we always try to verify the cases first, and and usually with the help of ILC members, we try to frame the context of the case in a simple and plain language, but where we have to say conflicts or disputes, we unfortunately just explicitly say it, because that's what happens, and we're making demands, right? That's what ILC members do with civil society. So that's how ILC supports such cases. But I also wanted to quickly answer another question, I think, who said that, and Kumar has also addressed this, what is really the incentive of reporting on land rights? And yeah, I know it's sad that some journalists are not that keen on going to the field, where for me personally, I find it very enriching, but maybe it doesn't work for all people. There are so many intersecting issues that connect with land and land rights. And if you are a journalist, or if you're a future journalist, I'm sure you are familiar with the term hook. How do you find the hook? The hook of land rights with climate, the hook of land rights with women's rights. It's all there. How land rights contribute to women's economic empowerment, let's say. And you don't have to start telling the story by explicitly saying we need secure land rights, even though that's your message. But you can always start by framing the life of a woman farmer, let's say, who has not been able to improve her livelihoods because she doesn't have access to land rights. So finding that hook, I think it's a challenge for journalists, but it's also, I think, what makes it interesting to report on land rights.
Samba?
Yeah, quickly respond to Pooja's question. Yeah, I think we spent some time to figure out why conflict and why this. So for us, stories, I mean, we as journalists, it's often job was to sort of report on injustices, right? Injustices happening around land, unequitable access to land or resources, or where people are being given short shift on their land rights, etc. But then we wanted to sort of also find a way or an encompassing theme which sort of covers all of it. And we thought that these injustices happen mostly around, say, transactions of land, or when land is taken, or when their rights are not respected. In all those cases, there would be contesting demands, contesting claims there around, say, either ownership of land or use of land, or just the control over land or access to land sometimes. So we thought that we wanted to have an encompassing definition of what really land conflict is, which sort of covers all these injustices in it, or beyond these also, which covers governance, which covers how businesses act. So then any situation, as we say, which is wherever there is a contest over use, control, access, or ownership over land between two parties, we call it a conflict, a land conflict. And again, as I said, we wanted to address more of broader injustices. So for us in a conflict, one party always has to be a community or people. While say individual property disputes or private property disputes, they are between two private parties or two brothers, sisters, families, right? They are generally termed as disputes. They are smaller and they are very direct. For us, conflicts were even bigger and broader. So that's why communities is one party. And then we said it covers a lot of layers around land. land disputes. So we call them conflict just because they're broader.
Gentleman there had a question.
Yeah,
I think the hosts have been very generous. Yes.
No, I'm just wondering, I mean,
Sorry.
Oh, you
Come
want me to-
closer so that others both can think.
No,
Please.
No, I was just wondering, I mean, this
Love
could.
to introduce.
Oh, hi, I'm Aman. I'm a PhD student doing some research in Bangalore on land markets and land issues. And so my question is probably closest to you guys at LCW. And I've seen your report and your methods. I'm just wondering, because you talked a little bit about some of the secondary documents you use, and I'm wondering how easy and accessible it has been for you guys to get some of that information from revenue departments and other government departments, how and when you use RTI versus building relationships, and whether that process is getting more difficult at a time when India's rankings in the Press Freedom Index, for instance, are not doing great. Let's say.
So, with your permission, can I use the chair's privilege to say, we'll try and entertain questions that can be addressed to all three panelists.
Okay.
Anything which is specific to only Sambhav, he's here after this. And he'll probably give you a more elaborate answer. I'm so sorry because
that's
I
fine.
want to keep it in a fashion that everyone can respond to these things in a far wider. Gentleman at the back, would you also please step up to the chair, introduce yourselves and a question?
Yeah, so my name is Balbir. I'm a PhD student myself. So my question is more on the lines of what was previously also asked in relation to communication, right? We had, I mean, initial panels in this conference itself, which looked at the issue of science versus policy, right? And if we add another dimension of people, as you mentioned, the role of community in understanding what land conflict then essentially means. And we have continued to understand that there are these various, I mean, practices around land that the community sort of reflects and respects. And then there's, I mean, the knowledge of science that comes in and percolates down to the people and some form of, I mean, mitigation happens. Then there's the policy bit where the bureaucrats and your politicians come in. So, and you sort of like frame your answer when you were communicating, how do you like sort of negotiate, like when you're writing a story? But my idea was more also that how do you communicate the knowledge which is present at the level of the science and the policy, as well as, I mean, at the community, for instance. So to balance both these out together so that none are also in conflict with each other. So how does land conflict try to do that? And then in that case, as you were mentioning, like about other forms of literature, right? Like prose, for instance, or like writing poems or short stories, right? Are these also other methodological forms, which is something that we see in disaster research, for instance, come up, like poems, for example, or short stories, or people clicking their own pictures of a disaster, have come up as better communication tools to communicate what land conflict is. So whereas, I mean, your own work and, I mean, like the broader space in which, I mean, others are also working is placed. So yeah.
Why don't we reverse this thing? You start and then we go back to the other panelists.
No, I think do you want to answer? Take that, not on behalf of Flight. Okay.
It's too tough.
I know it's, no, I think this we can do much better. Like you were saying, we probably need to bring more of communities' voices, their knowledge, art, music, as Nitin mentioned. We all need to broaden our ways of communicating, which we are not doing enough. I admit that. So there are ways, and I hope that we can reach a point where we say in such kind of gatherings, we also have people who communicate through other forms of communication, other forms of methodology. Yes, in terms of disaster, climate, and other knowledge, there been an attempt, and that people's voices are coming more in terms of their own knowledge. I think these stories do need knowledge of people and voices very much. They are the centric. Their lived experiences, in fact, sort of guide us to write about policies. So if we can bring all those together, that's the best, I think, the ideal scenario. And as I was saying in response to previous questions, it's also a matter of resources. It's also a matter of how the media business functions. If we get the opportunities to spend time with people. That's the first thing that we should look for in our stories, that the stories are fronted by people's experiences and their knowledge, and then the policies and other things comes together. Science is in fact very much important, and we do tend to often limit to policies, but wherever I think there is scope of including science, that's also important. We need to do better, as I said.
Now I'm tempted. So sorry, for the first time, I'll jump in as perhaps less a moderator, more a person with a comment. And I'll try to push you a little more to think along these lines, and I'll request the panelists later to contradict me if you think otherwise. What do you call science? And this clear isolation saying this is policy, this is science, this is people. And to be honest, it's quite ridiculous to have these three silos. I don't think they exist like this. Who are people who make policies? People who might have some notion of what is knowledge, where is science, somebody who might come from a different community whose understanding of how do you draw policy is very different because he comes, say, in India case, from a different caste, right? Similarly, what are people? Is people something unique which does not exist without any understanding? Well, actually, they are the ones who kind of hold a certain amount of science in their hands. I think it's more fluid to say all these things exist in every corner of whatever you're touching. You might have a bureaucrat who does policies, perhaps better in science and bad at, maybe good as a human being, bad as a bureaucrat. You might have a citizen you're talking to who has a deeper understanding of the subject than the scientist himself or herself because they've come for 3 months and gone away. So I don't think it works to have these three silos and say, how do I merge them? I think it's more saying, am I happy as a storyteller? I don't know how Sambhav does it. For me, a good storytelling, and sometimes you're happy with it, is to say, did you feel you completed a picture? Like, have you taken a reader, a viewer through a full script of a movie, and by the end of it, either left her lingering enough to say, damn, I need to see the second show, or, oh yes, I got the whole game. And I think that's more important than saying, have I got these 4 components? It's not like a jigsaw puzzle of 4 different ABCD chemicals that you bring together. At least that's my feeling. I don't know. Andita, sorry, I took the privilege of the chair.
I have a related question.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Another
It's a related
audience
question.
person. You'll have to introduce yourself and then add up.
My name is Sashidhar. I have an additional layer to the question that you are answering. Just picking up from what Nathan has said just now. So, somehow writes, let's say I'm assuming this, so like he correct me if I'm wrong. Sambhav's takes a position of let's say journalist, and Chendu is an academician who wants to inform the people. Anita is someone who's, let's say, I can call you a development communication professional if I may. So, 3 of you come from different positions, and you write. What could be? When do you feel that you have achieved your target, or what could be the success of your story? What do you think is the success of your story? So I just wanted to pick up your brains on that.
So again, I think Sambhav partly talked about this, saying, I want to hit the bureaucrats, I want to change the policy. I also want a larger mass of people attracted to it. I'll open with the Chendu, and as you guys are such great communicators, I'd only give you 1 minute each.
Still you're muted.
Okay. I think I'll start with the last question. So first of all, it's true we all compose of we're comprised of different elements in terms of what already has been said. So there are no strict silos. But that depends on where you are at any moment. What I see here is, let's say with the communication itself, in terms of success, I think I showed that. I write, practice theory as an academic, so I do research. A work the tenor responsive land use plan that I showed when I started has been cited 30 times. That's academic H index, right? And people are writing about it, doing thesis on it, so that's influence. But I'm much more interested in social impact, not academic impact. But that's because of the current level where I am in academics. When you are a PhD student or you're a junior lecturer, of course, you want citation. You want to build a H index. So that puts food on the table in the sense that you can get promotion, right? But when you get that promotion, you become a professor and all that, and you're getting old, you know you could die any moment, or rather you're enjoying your extra time. You begin to ask yourself, if I'm no more today, what have I achieved? Then you now want to turn down your academic skills into societal, something that will lead to societal improvement. So that's how it is. In my case, I've done several works that I think I'm happy with. But the most of them that I think I've had influence is tenor responsive land use planning that is being used. Now, I'm not talking about impact yet, because it being used itself does not mean that it has impact. But even to get to a place where a guide you produce as an academic is being used by organizations like the UN Habitat itself is progress, because those guys also don't understand academic language. So you always have to bring the language down. So what does it mean? For me, I took the position as a methodologist. So my focus is on finding solutions to problems. But there are others who try to make you understand the problem by dealing with the problem over and over and over again. So that's it. So you can never really have success in that sense that maybe another person is looking at it. But the question before with regards to, the communication part, and I think my colleague over there has been very apologetic as to how journalists are not doing a great job. Of course, it's also a very difficult job, because what you're seeing here, what you see here talking to you is not a journalist. That is somebody who became something else and now wants to do journalism, okay, or wants to use journalism as a tool. Someone like Andita has been a journalist and now chose to do something else. So it's always a package rather than a straightway jacket. So how do we do the communication? Of course, I have a personality, I have a person, I have a persona. My persona does the writing. So when I'm an academic, I wear the academic hat. And when I write for newspapers, I wear a citizenship hat or a policy, a policy hat. But I also try to get, and that's the reason I need to give it to other people to read, to deal with my own bias, knowing that I do have a background that could overshadow what I do. So I give you an instance of how I approach this. I once wrote a paper on an article on informal settlement. So I went into a taxi driver took me up to go play golf, and we started talking, and he started talking about the informal settlement, and the way he was describing it was different from the way I understand it, but in a much more vivid, clear, direct, and blunt manner. So I asked him, where do you live? He said he lives in the informal settlement. I called him to my office, I took a recording, and my approach to that particular article was, Uchendo, taxi driver, I asked a question, I quote directly his response, and after that, I just used maybe 90 words to summarize it. And I titled it, Direct the Voice of the Taxi Driver from the Informal Settlement. So because that communication was too tough for me and I couldn't deal with it, because there was no way I could have related that better than the man has said it himself. So I had to just put his experience and his direct words out there. And that's what you do as a PhD student, as an academic. That's basically what you do when you do interviews and face-to-face interviews and key informant interviews. You want to use quotes to let the people speak for themselves. And that's one way I've learned to allow the marginalized or whoever I'm dealing with to also speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Chintu. Andita, you want to respond to Sashi's question as well?
Thank you, Nathan. I'll start with the success measure of success. For us at ILC, maybe one thing that that is also very simple is that, and also most important, is that we feel that we've achieved success, or we're happy when our stories are out there, and when the voices of the community themselves feel happily represented, because that's, I think, the most important for us. We don't want to misrepresent their story. It's their lives, right? And it's hard for us maybe to understand and to relate to their struggles, to their livelihoods, and we try our best to capture that in the story. So when they say they're happy with it, and they feel like they appreciate our effort to tell the story on behalf of them, I think on a much simpler factor measurement, this is the how we feel happy about our stories. But also at the same time, we want to move forward with the stories that we've created, and that is, let's say, when our stories are considered as good practices, for example, of how one community, let's say, manages their pasture lands. Maybe one community in Gujarat, India, how they successfully manage their pasture lands by doing pasture rotation and so on, and keeping the pasture land sustainable. I'm just throwing a random example, but let's say when this documentation that we do have been considered as good practices, and that it is used as an advocacy tool for the community themselves, for their partners in NGOs, maybe to push for more just policies or regulations at the local or district level, or maybe if we dream big, at the national level. And there have been instances where our stories get that kind of visibility, and be seen as a good, again, a good practice that could be replicated in other contexts. So yeah, that's how we see it. And then I think I believe Uchendu has covered the first question very well, and I also think that there should be no silos between the community, the science community, and the government, let's say, in representing their voices. And this is also one of the key, let's say, methodologies or ethics that journalists also hold, is that we try to be impartial, not be biased, and represent everyone's voices. So when all, I'm not let's not try to separate them, but try to integrate them into one. And if they all can be represented in one story in a cohesive manner, I think that would be sufficient. Thank you, Nitin, and everyone.
I want to sharpen Sashi's question to you, not as an individual journalist, but as a head of an organization which is doing research, general publication, as well as talking to communities. What's a successful communication at LCW?
Tough one. I think a lot of LCW's success, just because I do think a lot of times as a journalist, I do feel that it has to be impact in terms of policies, where policies are more inclusive, and they do address injustices that happen. So that's the broad, I think, large purpose. But at the same time, even to feed into that purpose, that objective, we need more and more people to be engaged, more and more citizens to be engaged with the cause of understanding land and its injustices or land governance. So that's why a very important and large part of success measure would be to have as many people empathize to the issue of land governance and land issues. So yeah, I think it's almost similar to what even as journalists I say.
I remember Sambhav once talking to another younger colleague and saying, a good impactful story you smell it and you've done it well, is when you see somebody's heart getting wrenched with it. If you've strung that emotional stand within that person, even with very hard facts, is when it'll strike well. And you'll obviously get the government also going with it. I think surprisingly for 3 of you who were called communicators, we stretched ourselves 40 minutes over time. Fault is partly mine, and I think I'm grateful to the audience also for remaining engaged. Again, I will not try to sum this session up because it'll be idiotic with 3 communicators there. For me to try the better words, as Chendu was saying, if the taxi drivers told you what it is, you should not try and sum it up. So we had 3 brilliant taxi drivers telling us how life is lived, and I will not try to sum up how they're living it. Grateful to the host. I'm also aware the host played a trick on me. I'm the most verbose amongst you, therefore he made me in charge as a moderator rather than a panelist, so that I kind of keep in control. And grateful to all the 3 panelists who generously let me control them through the session. And thank you to everyone. With a request to Sambhav, because I've asked him to hold back, you'll have to respond to his question offline after this.
We'll do one-on-one.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Chendu. Thank you, Andita. One of my, I think, selfish interests in this was that while I whip you guys into time, if we ever see ourselves in each other's countries, that we'll all still serve each other food. I hope that's still true. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you for this
much.
opportunity.
Thank you, Andita.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Chendu,
Bye.
everyone.
Very, very good.